Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I actually have a really exciting guest, someone who I think most Australian females would look up to. I certainly do. Daisy Cousens. She's become a name in Australian conservative media and then some. Thank you so much, Daisy, for coming on my channel. This is so cool.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me. It's good to be here.
Oh, thank you for agreeing.
All good, all good. I'm happy to be here, trust me.
Yeah, well, I thought the very best place to start in terms of these questions would be how and why are you a conservative, and how did you get into commentating?
Yeah, it's a kind of longish circular story how sort of all of this came about. I mean, I in terms of the commentary thing, like I really just fell into it. Like I spent like the majority of my life wanting to be a theater performer, and I did a lot of training for that, but I always was interested in people. As you know, if to be a performer, you have to be interested in people, and I was interested in how people thought and how they felt and what they did and why they did. So if you're interested in people, you're inherently going to be interested in culture, and you're going to be interested in politics, because that all, relates to how people think and feel and why they vote. So I always had these opinions about politics, but I didn't grow up in a particularly political household at all. Like, it wasn't a big part of my childhood, but I was always kind of very freedom focused. I was always very opposed to any kind of group thing. If you know, which again is like anti-leftism right from the get-go. I was always very kind of I grew up doing competitive dance, and my dance teacher was extremely harsh, shall we say? So I grew up with a lot of discipline in that respect, and I was always very competitive.
Mm.
And right there, you will already see traits that make up people on the right. Like, so I think that was sort of, I was always very much an individualist. And I never sort of bought into what, people was like, oh, really? Is that actually true? How about I go, you see what I mean? I always had that kind of mentality.
The fact that you
Um,
believe in working hard, which is the left is all about socialism and not working
yeah.
hard, and government is my daddy. So that's been
Mm.
inbuilt in you, and that's a good thing to be inbuilt in you because it's not inbuilt in the generation of today.
Oh yeah, definitely. Competition is a dirty word now,
Mm.
nowadays, but I was always about competition. But in, of course, the kind of theatre world, I mean, that's where like the worst of the regressive left sits, is in, as we know, in the entertainment industry, not just in the film world, but in the, the theatre industry, the musical theatre industry, and a lot of it is peer pressure. Like, nobody actually presents them with a proper opposing point of view, and because they're in this kind of feelsy acting bubble, of course those kind of regressive opinions get pushed through. And so I was always like having these vicious arguments with people that I thought were my friends, and they were like on Facebook especially, and they would get so personal like
Mm.
that if I even presented an opinion that was slightly like pro the Liberal Party, or pro whoever
Yeah.
I was supporting at the time. And yeah, it just astounded me, and I kept sort of losing friends. And I always kind of loved writing as well as performing. And the thing about
We
the
have so
acting
much in
world is,
common.
yeah. The thing about the acting world is that, like, as I'm sure you know, like the unemployment rate is really high. Like, it's really hard in Australia, especially to make a living. And I loved writing, so I went and I studied that at Sydney University. I did a Master of Creative Writing, and I fell into kind of writing these opinion pieces. And I realized I had some skill at it, and I got good feedback. So I started writing for a women's magazine, which is a very good place to start
Yeah.
as a writer, because you cover such a broad scope of things, and there's serious things and not serious things, etc. But the political thing was still always there. I was still always wanting to have these discussions with people, but I totally pulled back from it, because I'm like, well, what's the point? The only people I know are big lefties, and they're not interested in
Yeah.
discussing. They'll just call me
Or,
a racist.
not to
Yeah,
interrupt you, or basics who know nothing about really
yeah,
anything and choose to have and that sounds really mean because I should say complacent, because I have fantastic friends, but at the same time I can't talk to them about politics or anything like that, yet they still somehow watch my videos and have an opinion on it, yet they don't look up any counter arguments, and so they sometimes just, one of them said that I was a traitor to my gender, and I just thought, okay. So
oh
sometimes,
no.
yeah, sometimes it's just people who are
Sometimes it's best not to have the discussion.
yes, and I
That's
don't want to. And sometimes it's just about they're in a bubble. Do you find that it's either they're not left or right? Sometimes it's just people who are in a bubble.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they only get presented with whatever your mainstream media is telling them, and of course the mainstream media swings largely leftwards,
Mm.
even though they pretend that there's some sort of murdocracy going on. I don't know, but yeah, so most people are apolitical. You know, they're
True.
busy raising kids and paying bills and stuff, so they don't have time
Mm.
to look this kind of stuff up. And like, why would they? They've got other really
Yeah.
important things to deal
Exactly.
with. Yeah, so it's hard, but like one thing led to another, and I fell into writing for Quadrant magazine, which is a conservative publication, and then the Spectator. And
Yes.
this was how the television started. I
Oh.
wrote a couple of articles for the Spectator, and they got some great feedback from the people who worked at the publication, the people who read them, and a producer from Counterpoint Radio on the APC read one of my articles and said, "Hey, do you want to come on the show and we'll talk about?" It was an article about millennials,
Mm.
making fun of millennials, which is very easy to do. Um,
Yeah.
so we went, and he's like, "Come and talk. We'll talk about millennials." So we did, and the producers of Q&A heard that interview, and got in contact with me via the Spectator and said, "Hey, Daisy, do you want to come and do the show?" And I remember talking to the producer on the phone, and like I was like terrified, even though it was what I wanted to do. I'd started, listening to Milo Yiannopoulos and Ben Shapiro and all those. It was my kind of red
Yeah.
pilling into being sort of like a moderately right wing to, conservative kind of classical liberal area. And I said, look, I was 28 at the time. I'm like, I said, I don't know if I have the resume for this. Like, do I have? And she said, look, Daisy, you're only 28. People don't actually expect you to have like a full career's worth of stuff. She's like, they don't expect that. We just want new people and new voices and interesting perspectives. So I did the show. It was the most frightening night of my life because it was
Oh.
literally, it was only 2 months after Trump had won. So it was when everyone was just,
Yay!
yeah, that was a good time. But they filmed it in Melbourne, and we all know what Melbourne is like in terms of
I'm sorry.
crazy. That's okay. It's not your fault. Don't worry. In terms of
I'm trying to
crazy
fix
green.
it. That's the point.
I know when you're doing a good job. But we filmed the show there, and literally there were all these people in the front row who were sort of my age or younger, just looking at me like this. That was the facial expression on, and I'm like, these people would shoot me if
I
they
get that
could.
all the
Like
time.
it was very scary. But one thing led to another. I somehow got through the show, and then other producers from other networks started calling me, and eventually I got some regular gigs at Sky News, and then I started my YouTube channel because I thought that's a logical extension of sort of doing bite-sized TV bits.
It is.
And here I am talking to you. So
Yay.
that's how it all began.
Well,
How it
I
all
saw
started.
I saw your interview with Luke Isaac, whom you and I think both share as a friend, and he said in the interview you sort of stated that Milo Yiannopoulos was part of your comeuppance, and I think the thing is that I think some people need to acknowledge that many don't, because many now don't like him, which is all well and good. Everyone's free to dislike whoever they want, and certainly my respect levels for him have sort of gone up and down. But he was the face of this movement. He's the one that sort of turned this into a thing in universities, and um, for sure he was part of my red pilling too. But not just Ben Shapiro, whom you mentioned as well, also Stephen Crowder, um,
Mm.
whom I love. And now,
Oh yeah.
yeah, and don't you find that here in this country of Australia, we need our own version of that? We need more, say, we need our own internet community where like we can exchange. So what I'm doing here, but it's not like official. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
have a studio. I don't like have my own like you know, Stephen Crowder has Blaze TV and Roaming
Mm.
Millennial has Blaze TV. We're sort of lacking that in this country. Don't you feel like if there was more of that, there'd be more we'd be more united, because the conservative right or centrist to conservative right is so fractured. How do you feel? What do you reckon about all that? And how do you reckon we could come together more?
Well, that's a really interesting point that, as conservatives in Australia who are sort of in the internet cultural cycle, we don't kind of have our own sort of unified network like Blaze TV, for instance.
PragerU. Mm,
Yeah, PragerU, exactly. We don't kind of have that, and I think that's partly to do with population size. Like
yeah.
Australia is so small. There's just comparatively less people to make these things up. And Australians are a little bit kind of self-effacing. You know, we don't put ourselves out there in the same way that Americans do,
True.
which is really frustrating.
Yeah,
But
true.
it's an absolute cultural thing. So we'd be kind of, it wouldn't really occur to us to do it in the way that it would to, hey, come on, let's get together, we'll do a big thing, it'll be great. Like Australians kind of don't do that.
Mm,
And it's also against the nature of conservatives and libertarians to collectivize. You know, we don't
exactly.
we don't do the group that's anti what we do. Generally, we're all kind of happy being sole traders, both sort of professionally and personally and everything. But I think it would be really beneficial if something like Blaze TV or Preggy or whatever was set up, because it would enable us all to have our own individual bits and pieces and channels, but come together and collaborate and have sort of one place that everyone could go to find all of this. And I think it would certainly help present that sensible opposing opinion to everyone, particularly young people. I mean, half the reason I think in fact, a lot of the reason millennials, especially millennial women, are so hopeless is because nobody actually gives them a credible opposing opinion. I mean, all they get told is that anyone who disagrees with them is a Nazi. I think it would benefit us all to have that kind of one network because, like, yeah, what I was saying, the reason that millennials are so hopeless, and especially the millennial women, is
Yeah,
because
that's what I was
nobody,
saying.
nobody gives them a credible second opinion because they're told that their opposition is not only wrong but evil, and that's the difference between the left and the right. The right think the left are naive, but the left think the right are evil, and that is a great big distinction right there. So if you're sort of an apolitical person and all of the stuff around you is that, you know, XYZ conservative politician is a Nazi, or Milo is a white supremacist, or, you know, XYZ caused this, you know, white supremacist attack, etc., etc. Well, if you've got no one presenting the opposite and going, hang on a minute, that's actually not true. Well, you know, what are you going to believe? Most people are well-meaning, particularly young people who aren't sort of tarnished by cynicism and disappointment yet.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they're going to want to do what they perceive to be the right thing. Now, with these regressive leftists who are saying all this kind of stuff, though, I think they're actually bad people. The most, like the ones you see on Twitter, for instance, the most aggressive, militantly tolerant ones are extremists. And I find that bad people often try to exercise their badness under the banner of good.
Mm.
And you certainly see that with militant feminists and, you know, the radical gender crew and jihadis, they think they're doing the right thing. You know, you've got white supremacists. The Christchurch killer probably definitely thought he was doing the right thing because they use you know what I mean? They use their evil and compensate for it by saying, no, 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 this is for the greater good. And that's a really good way to kind of trick the gullible is say we have the moral high ground here because well-meaning people, which is most people, will gravitate towards that, and that's how corruption starts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a lot of the problem is that no solid opposing opinion, and that would be helped if we had a network like PragerU or Blaze Media, etc.
I would agree with that. What is your opinion overall on certain types of collectivism? Because if we think about the fact that we are individualist, there still exists. I've made a video called Collectivism versus Individualism, and
Mm,
there is in fact a level of collectivism that exists on the conservative side. For those who believe in God, that tends to be a big part of collectivism. Patriotism, which is now dirty for whatever reason,
yeah.
being proud of being Australian. These are levels of collectivism. So do you think there can be a benefit to this word and a benefit to this concept?
Well, people are always there's always going to be groups, for instance, church groups and like-minded people, book clubs. For
Mm,
instance, humans are inherently social creatures. So yeah, it's all very well to say you're ultimately an individualist, but ultimately, unless you're a very particular type of person, you're going to gravitate towards groups of people who make you feel good and who validate you and all of that kind of stuff. That's very basic human instinct. The problem comes when the group identity starts to override the individual identity. Because, and I remember Jordan Peterson talking about this on Q&A, the trooper and pioneer that he is getting through that evening.
Bad Badham.
Oh God, that was what was Terry Butler that irked
Oh, I
me the
know.
most. But he was saying the problem, with if you let the rights of the group override the rights of the individual, you can assign collective guilt to people, for instance, which is what we see with sort of white guilt and this male privilege stuff going on. So it's
Reparations.
yeah, collecting together is fine. Being patriotic, proud of your country is fine. Having your church community is wonderful. But it's when the individual starts to sacrifice their own principles for the group that it becomes a problem. Because often, if you're an individual, the group policy, shall we say, might be something you don't agree with. It might be something that goes deeply against your principles. But if you put the group identity over your own identity and over your own morals and thoughts and feelings, well, you're compromising yourselves. And probably instinctively, if you think whatever the group is saying or doing is wrong, it probably is wrong. And yet you're not kind of sticking up for that and going, hang on a minute, no, I as an individual object to that because you've submitted to the group. So collecting is fine. It's when collectivism overrides individualism that the danger starts.
This is an aha moment for me. That's very good.
That's a light bulb moment. Aha! There are little bing, bing, bingers going on right now. Big, 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 big. I love it when it happens because it means, yay, everything's still working.
Oh, that was good. I love
good.
that.
I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to kind of talk those things out.
Yeah.
I find it useful for myself to talk about them as well.
That was really good. Collecting is good, but collectivism, that's really good.
Collecting versus collectivism.
Thank you for that aha moment in my life.
No worries. Glad I could oblige.
Well, because we've just circled back to leftist think, and that's exactly why I personally have an issue with collectivism myself. But I think the unfortunate thing is that we do it a lot on the right, or certain people do, and they don't acknowledge it. And thought consistency seems to be something that both sides and centrists struggle with. Thought consistency, for example, this is the only thing that's coming to my mind, and I don't know why it is, but when people have such a strong allegiance, say, to their faith, like people who are pro-Jew, pro-Israel, sometimes people are so quick to point the finger and call someone a Nazi when maybe they once were and they no longer are, but then they still hold on to this allegiance or this loyalty, even at the detriment of being blinded by their loyalty to that, rather than looking at the bigger picture. I don't like that. I find that to be wrong, because you should judge people, because people say they don't judge, everyone does, but people should be judged on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I think people can certainly change their opinions. That's part of being human. And I always say, once the facts change, so should your opinions. I mean, I used to call myself a feminist before I realized that the movement had just gone down the toilet.
Absolutely.
Which ironically I realized while I was writing for a women's magazine. It's true.
There's ironies in life.
I know, you're exposed to it and you go, okay, that's fine. But I used to call myself that, but then I had these, but just because that was kind of the Kool-Aid, that was the millennial Kool-Aid. And again, this was when I was more moderate than I would have called myself more of a moderate than a conservative. But then I had suspicions about the gender pay gap. I thought, how on earth can anyone get away with paying women less than men for the same work? That's ridiculous.
It'd be illegal everywhere, and there'd be women in every single industry.
Exactly. But, and I started thinking about that, and I started researching, and again, that's when I started listening to Milo and stuff, and I exposed myself to new facts. And it was such a huge relief for me, because I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going crazy then. And that changed my opinions, because I had new facts, new experiences, new contact with different people. So of course my opinions changed. Absolutely. So, if you expose yourself to different opinions and new facts and new research and new people who think differently, well, unless you're completely obtuse, your opinions probably are going to change, this much or this much, depending on how you go. So if you're judging someone, say now, for their opinions and beliefs I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, when they have clearly and publicly changed their stance and perhaps apologized or compensated for what they used to believe, well, then you're only making yourself look like a fool. Because, yeah, this person has obviously made an effort to change and has been very open about that. If you're still going, well, yeah, but in, 2006, you said this, and this, and it's like, well, yeah, they did, and they now said they don't think that anymore, so stop. So, yeah. That's what I think.
Do you find that you notice on our own side that there are some people who are still very SJW in nature?
Yeah, there's a section of the right, and they're the conservatives, who really don't like me. They certainly had an issue with me when I first started.
I don't know why I found that funny. That's so
yeah. No, but they don't.
Sorry.
And they're the same. No, it's okay. They're the same people who don't like Milo because they don't like the campery and they don't like the sort of entertainer factor.
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was hilarious.
I love it too. That's why I love Milo, and I very much aligned myself with Milo when I first started doing what I do. It was a similar stuff, not quite as provocative as Milo by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a similar style. Well, I have nothing against swearing at all, and I love it when Milo swears, but I choose not to use profanities. I couldn't pull them off nearly as well as he does.
No, I'm not even talking about the swearing. I just don't like the way he talks about going down on other people. I find that.
See, that doesn't bother. That I'm fine.
Yeah, because we're different. I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
You're obviously not.
Yeah. No. Well, I grew up in the theatre world. I spent all of that time in the most flagrantly open, sexually liberal industry you'll ever find, and that is the good thing about it's a kind of a double-edged sword, but everyone is very, very kind of comfortable in talking about that kind of stuff. That's
what I meant, but the swearing doesn't bother me. No.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. No, so that I can understand why that bothers you, given obviously the way you've grown up. But for me, I'm just like, oh, that's just a Saturday afternoon.
My purity.
Yeah. No, but I get what you mean. He's not necessarily accessible to everyone.
No, but he defends Christians. That's why I love him.
He does defend Christians stoically. Well, he's lapsed Catholic, as he called, he's a cultural Catholic. And partially Jewish, so he's but he defends Christians vehemently,
which I love.
Yeah. Oh, I love it too.
There's my collectivism, but yeah.
No, but that's your collecting though. That's not.
That's right. Sorry, my aha moment. I lost it already.
No. It's fine. It's fine. But yeah, they don't, and they kind of didn't like the narkiness with me as well, because I was very, very, very Regina George.
But you do it well, and sorry, I want you to keep your thought there. But I saw you on you know what I'm about to say. I saw you go head to head with I forgot her name, but
Clementine.
Yeah, Clementine Ford.
Why do you make why have you never attacked my argument, Clementine?
But I have attacked your argument.
When?
I've criticised the things that you write about. One of the reasons why I hated your Bill Leak piece so much was because you proudly set yourself out as someone who takes pride in trolling people on the internet.
But don't you as well? In what way did I troll people by writing a tribute article to Bill Leak? I wrote a very
You said that you considered yourself to be a provocateur who took pride in triggering snowflakes on the internet.
All right, guys. I think we're going to have to leave it there. I think we've gone pretty deep into this, as Joe pointed out. Guys, I felt like we were making a little bit of progress there, but we're going deep into heaven here, as Joe pointed out. Please.
And you are a strong woman, and she is actually not. She's superficially strong. She pretends she's a strong woman. You genuinely are. Okay, continue. No, that's okay. It's true. So snuck away.
That was an very interesting night. But in terms of the right being kind of a bit SJW about their beliefs, they're really, really, really I call them the trads, like the real traditionalist conservatives who have a very, very rigid, strict idea of what it actually means to be a conservative in terms of how you should behave, as well as what you think. And it irritates the crap out of me, because to me, and look, I understand it. If you want to define a conservative in a particular way, then people like me wouldn't be called conservatives. But and that's fine. But I don't agree with that mentality. I think, you know, we're not the left. There's much more scope for independent thought and
it's not
healing.
an echo chamber on this side of things.
No. There's no kind of party
so many
line.
Variations.
Yeah, many variations, and they try to institute this party line. It's like, well, you can't sit with us if you don't behave exactly how we think you should. Yeah. And I can't.
Oh my God, I'm gonna clip that in.
Yeah, you can't sit with us. I know, I love that bit. You can't sit with us.
Yeah.
But it is like that, and it used to. And I've since reconciled with a few of those trads because they realized reasonably quickly that I wasn't a lightweight, which was some of the criticism. But yeah, I've written like stuff for the Spectator, and literally had responses from trads. People like, well, Daisy Cousens wrote this, and they sent it in, and it's really good because I'm like, oh, I evoked a response. This is good, a response article.
That's what you want. You want to provoke a reaction, a good one, not a negative one.
It's just really funny when I trigger people on the right. You know what I mean? But yeah, there is a faction of the conservative movement that does that, and I do not like it, and I don't think it's helpful, and just, you know, just stop.
Yeah.
Would be my message to them. Just stop.